Welcome back to Speaking Truth Love Ministries Bible Study. We are continuing our end time series. And so far, the last few sessions, we've talked about from the cross to eternity, kind of an overview of history from the cross and then all the way through today and the 70th week of Daniel and on into eternity. We talked a little bit about the rapture and the second coming and the differences between the two. And what I'm going to do tonight is we're going to go back and get started on the seal judgments. Faith's going to put that up in just a few minutes. But before I get to chapter 6 and into the seal judgments, just a quick review or summary of Revelation 1 through 5. So in chapter 1 of Revelation, the scene there is John is on the Isle of Patmos in the Mediterranean Sea. He's in exile there. He's a very elderly man at that point. And he sees a vision of Jesus Christ in chapter 1. Chapters 2 and 3, Jesus Christ has a message to 7 specific churches. It was called Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. All 7 churches are in that region. And 5 out of the 7 churches, even back then in the early church, Jesus has to say to them that they need to repent. 5 out of the 7. That's chapters 2 and 3. Then you get to chapter 4, verse 1. Then John is actually caught up to heaven. And he sees a scene in heaven, chapters 4 and 5. He sees the throne, the Father on the throne. He sees 24 thrones around that with the 24 elders. He sees the 4 living creatures and, of course, the angelic hosts. And John witnesses that. And there's a bit of drama in chapter 5. John sees a scroll, a book or a scroll, in the Father's hand, and it has 7 seals around it. And there is a search made, which is kind of interesting because obviously God knows who was going to be able to open the book, but it looks like heaven goes through the motions or the drama of looking for somebody worthy to loose the seals and open the book. And so it says a search is made, but there was nobody found in heaven, on earth, or under the earth worthy to open the book. And so it's so moving for John, he begins to weep. So these are not just words on a page. John is experiencing this in heaven, and he begins to weep. And then one of the angels tells him not to weep because someone has been found worthy. And of course, that's Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. And so Jesus was found worthy. And so he's going to loose the 7 seals in order to get to the contents of the book or the scroll. Now, we kind of forget about that as we're going here, because when we get to the end of Revelation, chapter 19 is when Christ comes back on the white horse, and then there's going to be 1,000-year millennial kingdom. But then we have when the books are actually opened, and people of the earth are judged out of those books. And whether this particular scroll or book is one of those, we assume it is, but Jesus has to loose the 7 seals before that can be opened. So we're going to go to chapter 6 in this study, and we're going to take a closer look at the 6 seal judgments. Now, when he opens the 7th seal, that's going to become 7 trumpet judgments. When the 7th trumpet is blown, that eventually becomes 7 bowl judgments. But take your Bibles, if you've got them there with you. We're starting out Revelation chapter 6. Let's go down to verse 1. Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now, Faith, why don't you go ahead and put that slide up, and I'll have people just take a look at that, refer to it. Now, when you look at this at this map, the diagram of the 7 years and how I've got the different judgments plotted out on here, almost everybody that teaches on prophecy, we're going to have things a little bit different from one timeline to another. Not everybody's going to put these things in the same place that I have, but I think these seal judgments are going to happen certainly in the first half. I think the rider on the white horse, the first seal judgment, probably is going to be just the first few months of the 7 years of tribulation. When you think about all the things that are going to happen here, you've got 3 full sets of judgments, and I actually have really a 4th set of judgments, and you'll see it on this timeline with the 2 witnesses. And that doesn't get talked about as much, but there's some really interesting things that take place when the 6th trumpet is blown, and that's in chapter 9. And then we get to chapter 11 where the 2 witnesses are introduced. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that when we get to it. But just a comment about, why do I've got the seal judgments fairly close in the beginning. I've got the trumpet judgments still in the first half. And again, I know that there'll be others that place them in the second half. I'm going to place them in the first half for a number of reasons, which I'll explain later. So the rider on the white horse goes out. Probably this is a few months because so much has to take place in the 7 years. This is a false peace, a false time of peace on the earth. You remember all the talk about peace, which is really interesting because when you look at the world today, you look at President Trump and the Abraham Accords, and there's this huge push, and it looks like there's a possibility that many of the Arab League nations, and there's 22 Arab League nations, that many of them, maybe all of them, are considering signing on to Abraham Accords. So there's so much talk about peace. We've got war going on, a lot of talk about war, threats of war, all that stuff the Bible predicted. When they say peace and safety, that sudden destruction through peace that will destroy many. So you have both dynamics are going. And I heard someone the other day, I think it was on Prophecy Watchers, that made the statement that, everyone's talking about the wars and rumors of wars that Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24. But he said, what I'm looking for is the peace. And so that is a critical aspect of this that we often overlook. There is a lot of talk about peace. We think the rider on the white horse is probably the Antichrist. He goes out with a bow. There's no mention there to arrows or the specific ammunition that he would use if it was open warfare. We know it's not war because when the rider on the red horse comes out, which we'll get to next, he has power to take peace from the earth. So we know the rider on the white horse, this is a time of false peace, and the world is probably going to have a sense of they're going to let down their guard. They're going to relax a little bit because it seems like we finally have world peace and maybe everything's going to be okay now. And of course, when the rider on the red horse comes out, all hell's going to break loose. And I say that intentionally because that's exactly what's going to happen. So what is the rider on the white horse doing? It says he goes out conquering and to conquer. So if it's not warfare, my thoughts on this are that the rider on the right horse, if he's the Antichrist, he's coming out of what's the modern day European Union, which will be out of the old Roman Empire. So it's the revived Roman Empire. He's going to come out during this time of peace, and he's going to gather other nations together, and he's going to form a very powerful coalition. Because when World War III actually does break out, it'll be all-out warfare on the earth where every nation is going to in some way be involved in this. And so I think the Antichrist, and keep in mind now, why is it going to be the European Union? Why is it going to be the revived Roman Empire? For one primary reason, because that is the empire that Satan chooses to give his power to. And Satan could have chosen China, he could have chosen other nations, but he's going to choose a coalition, the revived Roman Empire. It's what God prophesied, talked about Daniel chapter 2, the legs of iron, feet of iron clay, Daniel 7, with the beast with 7 heads, 10 horns. So all of that's going to converge. All that's going to come into play. We think that the rider on the white horse is going out. He's gathering nations to form a federation, a coalition, which we'll talk more about as we get into chapter 9. That's the rider on the white horse. So let's go down a little bit farther. He goes out conquering the conquer, but down to verse 3, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come and see." Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. Now it says people should kill one another. Now Jesus said in Matthew 24, he described it as nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. But it isn't just going to be that. This says people. When you think of the different forms of government right now in the world today, we've got democracies, we've got socialistic governments, we've got communist governments, but probably as bad as the communist governments are, and a lot of these dictatorships, as bad as they are, probably the worst possible conditions to live under is anarchy, where there is no governing authority. And it's, how many movies are out there, probably literally hundreds of them out there, that deal with this anarchy scenario, end times type scenario. And it's like they're horror movies. You're called horror movies for a reason. There's going to be anarchy. There's going to be World War III, where the nations are going to be fighting against each other on multiple fronts. It'll be different than World War I, World War II. Very quickly, the nations of the world, the ones that did get involved, and most of them did, especially in World War II, most of the nations of the world were some way involved in World War II. The difference, I think, between World War II and World War III, in World War II, you had two clear sides. So you've got Japan and Italy and Germany form alliances. And initially there's a standoff or an agreement with the Soviet Union. And that's eventually Hitler breaks that. And so basically everyone turns against those three nations. World War III is going to be different. I think we're going to see the hot spots all around the world. I mean, likely India and Pakistan, Azerbaijan and Armenia just signed a peace agreement. But all of these, there's ancient hatred. There's ancient boundary disputes with so many of the nations around the world that it's not going to be just two clear sides. I think there's going to be a lot of different nations fighting against each other. So much more chaotic, if you will, I think, than even the first two world wars. So nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, people are going to be killing each other. That's the rider on the red horse, given a great sword. Now, verse 5, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse. And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." Now, the last part, do not harm the oil and the wine, I don't know what that means. I've heard different explanations. Some people talk about that it is going to be extremely hard. This is going to be a famine that's going to hit lower class, middle class, but the elites will still have, they're going to still have everything. You know, they've got the wealth and they've got whatever food's left on earth. I mean, they're going to have that. That's one possible explanation. But the main point of this is a day's wages. It's going to take a day's wages to buy a loaf of bread. And imagine, you know, how hard it is. You go to the grocery store today, and I mean, it is crazy ever since COVID when everything just went crazy. And you buy 2-3 bags of groceries and it's $100, where, you know, before it was like $25-$30. That's over $100. But can you imagine spending a whole day's wages and all you get's a loaf of bread? That doesn't pay bills. I mean, everything's going to go into collapse here. And famine is naturally follows war. If you think about the war with you know, Russia invading Ukraine, remember Ukraine was considered, you know, the bread basket of Europe, and Ukraine supplied, you know, grain for nations around the world, and especially they sent a lot of grain down into the African nations, which already struggle with drought and famine. So they were hit hard. But imagine when war breaks out all around the world. You know, these massive cargo ships that haul, you know, grains and oil and all of that stuff are going to be massively impacted when these wars break out. So famine's going to follow. But now look at the next one. So in verse 7, when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and with the beasts of the earth. So the pale horse comes out, fourth seal's open, pale horse comes out. And it is interesting because the rider on the fourth horse is actually named, where the first three don't have a name, but it says the name of him who sat on it was Death. And then it says hell followed with him. And so death and disease, a lot of people feel this as pestilence, which again naturally follows. So you've got the false peace, you've got massive war, and then on the heels of that, you're going to have famine, extreme shortage of food, extreme difficulty, and then you're going to have disease. It follows the famine part of it. So the seals are opened, and these four riders come out. Now, something that's interesting here as well, at the end of that verse, in verse 8, it says, and power was given to them. So to them is a reference to all the riders. Power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill. And then notice the list. With sword, that's the rider on the red horse. With hunger, the rider on the black horse. With death, the rider on the pale horse. And then notice this, and by the beasts of the earth. Now, first of all, let's talk about the quarter of the Earth's population. We have over 8 billion people in the world today. Believers are going to be taken to a place of safety. We're raptured out before God pours his judgment out. That's what we see in Matthew 24 and Luke 17, where Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall be when the Son of Man comes. The day that Noah got in the ark, the rains came and destroyed them all. That's the passage there in Luke. And the same thing with Lot. The day that Lot and his wife and two unmarried daughters get out of Sodom and Gomorrah, the judgment falls. So God takes his people to safety first. The judgment comes very quickly after that. And so you have whoever's going to be raptured out. Even if we say, you know, probably millions. Is there 500 million believers today? Are there 500 million? I don't know. But let's just say it's a half a billion. Let's say it's 500 million believers around the world, all raptured out. So it leaves us over 7.5 billion people in the world that are left. a quarter of those are going to be killed just in that first year and a half, 2 years, maybe 2.5 years of tribulation. 1.5 billion, over 1.5 billion killed. Now let that sink in. 1 billion is 1,000 million. I mean, it's so staggering. It's hard to wrap your head around that, to try to imagine. I mean, how many millions upon millions are being killed every single day? Every single day when this war breaks out, and then you've got the famine, massive amounts of people. But let's talk about the last part of verse 8, where it says, in the wild beasts of the earth, or the beasts of the earth. So we see it when God made Adam and Eve in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, and we've got the creation account, the creation story. We got the fall in Genesis chapter 3, and then we get to the flood, Genesis 6 to 9. God put the fear of man on the animal kingdom. Whole animal kingdom has an instinctive fear of man. And we see it even today. That's why, as a general rule, if you go out in the woods, and I've been out around here in central New York, we have quite a few bear. And here not too many years ago, I had a hunting camp with a friend of mine, and we had a pond on the hunting camp, and I was out looking at the dike of the pond because we were going to have to get a dozer in, do some repair work. And I was standing there, looking at what I was going to have to do with the dozer, and we got it in there to take the dike out, part of it out, repair it. And we had a cabin that we had built. I had walked out of the cabin, and the cabin was right on the edge of the pond, walked around the dike, and I'm standing there looking at that. I turn around and go back to the cabin, and there was a bear 30 feet behind me between where I am and the cabin. The bear could easily kill you. Especially you have, no weapons on. Didn't have a knife on me, didn't have a gun. Wouldn't have stood a chance against that bear. But that bear instinctively, I clapped my hands and said something, and it turned around and went down over the dike through the brush, and it was gone. Now, that's because God put the fear of man on the animal kingdom. Now, it's true, almost every year around the world, there are animals that kill people. We hear about shark attacks, bear attacks. It seems like every year out in the western part of the United States, a grizzly bear, there's an attack that's fatal. No doubt there's exceptions where animals are killing people. But can you imagine in the 7 years? Because what I think this means, this specific reference to the beasts of the earth accounting for a quarter, along with the war with famine, disease, and the beasts that accounts for over 1.5 billion deaths. So what I think is happening here is God is going to remove the fear of man from the animal kingdom. And again, there's nothing good about, I say nothing good about the 7 years. There will be many people that get saved. That's good. God's grace is still, even though he's pouring his wrath out, his grace isn't over because he's still witnessing. He's still calling people, right? He seals 144,000 male virgin Jews, 12,000 from each tribe. God seals them. We think they go out and they evangelize folks on the earth. And it says multitudes from every kindred, nation, tongue, and tribe get saved. So that's good. But I mean, all of the judgments and the horror that's happening on earth, it is going to be beyond imagination. But let's go to the fifth seal judgment here for a minute. And remember, John's in heaven. He's actually seeing, he's witnessing as Christ is unsealing the seals. So he gets to the fifth seal, verse 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. So this is the first massive wave of persecution. Believers that are being killed because they are believers in Jesus Christ. And it looks like there's going to be at least two more waves of massive persecution. This is the first one in the end of chapter 7, the second half. There's another reference to a large group. Sometimes people think it's the same, and it could be, but it looks to me like maybe these are two separate groups. And then when we get halfway through and the mark of the beast is implemented, 666, and it's mandatory, you can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast in Revelation 13, there's going to be another massive wave of persecution. And just putting those three in mind, and then let's add to that Revelation 17, where it's talking about Babylon, both chapters 17 and 18. But in chapter 17, John sees another scene in heaven, and it's the woman or the whore, the harlot on the beast, which represents Satan, but also the whole evil revived Roman Empire. The woman that John sees on the beast, it says, is drunk with the blood of the saints, which means she's intoxicated. And I think part of what's going to be happening in the 7 years, as the one world government gets completely formed halfway through, and the city that's going to reign over, because Revelation 17 says that the woman on the beast is the city that reigns over the kings of the earth. That city, wherever it is, it looks like that many, many Christians are going to be taken there and slaughtered, much like they did in the early church. Sure, there were believers martyred all over the place, but many of them were taken prisoner to Rome, put into colosseums with the wild animals. They were nailed to crosses and burned in Nero's garden to light his garden at night. I mean, just horrific stuff. If you ever read or have read the Fox's Book of Martyrs, it gives great detail and account of the horrors of that time period. That's going to happen all over again, except it's going to be on a level. Instead of talking, hundreds of thousands, you're going to soar past millions. Hundreds of millions. We don't know how many people are going to get saved in the 7 years, but many of them are going to be martyred. Not all. There'll be believers that live through the 7 years. But back to this scene under the fifth seal, the scene under the altar in heaven there. So John sees the souls, it says here, of those who had been slain for the word of God, for their testimony. But look at what they're saying. Verse 10, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? So it's interesting. I mean, they've been slain. Their soul and spirits in heaven. Yeah, they don't have their glorified bodies yet, but they're in heaven. And they're new arrivals, right? They haven't received the white robes yet. So these are like new arrivals, a large number of new arrivals. John sees that. He sees that scene, almost like you and I might see a TV scene. The altar in heaven, right? I mean, how big is that? But he sees the scene. So it's like your large screen TV that you got in your living room, and you're watching something on that TV, and you might be seeing a stadium at the Super Bowl, or where you've got tens of thousands of people. At some of these events, they have over 100,000 people. I think that's what he's seeing. He's seeing a scene under the altar, and these folks have become believers during the 7 years. They're slain for their testimony, and they're crying out to God, how long before you judge and take vengeance on those who dwell on earth? And it's interesting because it says white robes, verse 11, a white robe was given to each of them. It was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both, you see the word both there, both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren. It's almost like they're two different groups, fellow servants and brethren. And, it seems to me like there's three distinct massive waves of persecution. Now, there's going to be people killed throughout the 7 years. Natural deaths, war, famine, disease, but then martyrs. I mean, in anarchy, people killing people. So all of that stuff is happening. That's the fifth seal judgment. Now let's go to the sixth seal judgment. Verse 12. I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. And the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its late figs when it's shaken by a mighty wind. Let's take those verses for a minute before I go on to the rest of them. So you have a massive earthquake. There's going to be another massive earthquake, worse than this one, at the end of the 7 years. The Earth's platelets right now, and I think a lot of this destruction, devastation goes back to the flood of Noah's day, when the fountains of the deep broke up. We had, massive subterranean water deposits that all of a sudden were shooting out volcanic activity, earthquakes, all kinds of stuff. The windows of heaven collapsed. When we get to the tribulation period, those platelets that form the foundation to the earth, everything on the surface sits on those rock formations that God refers to as the foundations of the earth. And there's a number, of course, massive platelets, and they shift and move, and there's pressure. And when you get a sudden release, you get an earthquake. There's just a massive earthquake off the Russian coast here a number of days ago that created a tsunami throughout the Pacific Ocean. Now, it didn't do near the damage that the massive earthquake and tsunami did in Japan a while back, but it got everyone's attention, an 8.8, I believe, on the Richter scale. And it was, I think, in the top 10 in terms of the largest earthquakes that we have recorded. Now, there's other earthquakes in the past that they are pretty sure are larger than that. But this earthquake is going to be massive, and it's going to impact the whole earth. This is going to be different than localized earthquakes. I think that you're going to see a shifting of all the Earth's platelets when this sixth seal is opened. And so it's going to be unlike anything that we've seen before. Where it talks about, where Jesus talked about Matthew 24, earthquakes in various places, many places, diverse places. We do have earthquakes all around the world. Most of them are small, but there's activity, seismic activity all the time. This is different in the sense we're talking about major quakes, and probably all of these platelets of the earth are going to shift. And so there's going to be a shaking on earth like we've never seen before. And it also talks about here, right after that, it talks about the stars of heaven falling. Now, it's probably not the stars as we think of the stars, but it's probably a massive meteorite shower pummeling the earth. Meteors that become meteorites when they strike the earth. And we just had it was a spectacular video. Fortunately, nobody was killed in it. But I don't know if any of you guys saw the video of that meteorite that is coming down, and straight down, it goes right through somebody's roof. Now, it had burned up, so it's just a small rock, hits the roof, comes down through the ceiling and into the floor. And again, fortunately, nobody was hurt by that, but it's on. We caught it on video, so you can actually watch it on online. But imagine those coming down the size of tables, or the size of cars, or the size of buses, and pummeling the earth. And it's going to create massive devastation. And it's also interesting because these things, I don't know if they're like a domino effect. Not that an earthquake is going to trigger, a heavenly event necessarily, but because of the judgment, we're going to see the heavenly event, these meteorites coming down, as well as the earthquake. But look at what else it says here. Verse 14, then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and every island was moved out of its place. Now that's a clear, when you hear the description of that, the sky receded as a scroll and it's rolled up. I mean, the visual is like a mushroom cloud from a nuclear blast. And you see that come up. We've all watched video of that, right? That energy boils up after the blast, and then it curls out and rolls back into itself. Whether this is a nuclear strike or nuclear war, whether this is a result, if you have a large enough asteroid strike the Earth, it's coming thousands of miles an hour, and if you get something that is the size of a house, and it hits the Earth, you're going to get something similar to that because you have such a massive release of energy. And so it can be any number of things, but that's what he's describing. John's describing when Christ opens the sixth seal, the massive earthquake, the stars of heaven, these meteorites pummeling the earth, and he sees, and it sounds singular, but this may be happening all over the earth, where you see this energy release, and it comes up and mushrooms back like a mushroom cloud, like a scroll rolling together. That's described here. And then also it says that every mountain and island was moved out of its place. Now, I was reading something just the other day on earthquakes, and I can't remember if it's the one that just happened off the Russian coast, but they were talking about literally islands especially, but different locations, different GPS locations on the earth, shifting as much as a couple of meters after this particular earthquake that they were talking about. Now, because again, remember, it's the platelets of the earth are going to be shifting. When it says here that, let me read it again, just so you get it. It says that every mountain and island was moved out of its place. That's talking about its GPS coordinates. Its location on the earth is going to change. Every mountain, every island. That gives you an idea of the scope of this earthquake. God's not naive, right? And God's not over dramatic, and God doesn't exaggerate, does he? When he says every mountain and every island are going to move out of place, that's exactly what's going to happen. And because the platelets are going to be shifting, that's exactly what's going to take place. How far they go, we don't know. But look at what happens next here. It says, and the kings of the earth and the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave, every free man hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who is able to stand. You notice the first people listed in that, the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men. Then it says after that, every slave and every free man. We hear stories. I don't know if they're theories. We don't know how much of this is fact, but you can find all kinds of stuff online about our politicians, our multimillionaires, our billionaires, the people around the world are busy building not just bomb shelters, but but like underground cities, preparing for just this kind of an event, preparing for nuclear war, preparing for chaos. They're spending much of their money to do this with the thinking that we'll be able to survive. And of course, they're not looking at it from a biblical perspective. They're thinking we can survive. And then when the crisis is over, come back out of our shelters and bunkers and start life over again. But it is fascinating that, that God almost 2,000 years ago is showing John scenes in heaven about what's going to happen when Christ opens that sixth seal and this massive earthquake takes place. And then you've got this massive meteorite shower on top of that. All of that stuff's going on. People are running for their bunkers. They're running for their shelters. They're going underground because the devastation is going to be so great. And then if you add with that the possibility of nuclear war, whatever this is, the destruction is massive. So you can easily see how we get to 1/4 of the Earth's population being destroyed in these judgments. And it's also interesting what these people are doing when they get to their bomb shelters, because as the earth is shaking, they're crying out, apparently in unison, right? All of them, you get the impression here, all of them are crying out for the mountains to fall on them. Why? I mean, who in the world wants a mountain to fall on them? Because the whole world by this point knows that God is real. And yet most of them are going to reject God, and they're going to follow the Antichrist. They're going to follow Satan, the beast, and the false prophet. Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. I think there are a lot of people today who have come to believe that God's the bad guy and Satan's the good guy. I mean, how many times do you hear people curse God or blame God because things are going bad in their life? We hear that all the time. I mean, even sad to say, sometimes we blame God, right? We get angry with God. Let's just be honest. God seems to get the blame. A lot of people are going to turn to the Antichrist thinking that he's going to be able to help them more. And so even though all of this catastrophic stuff is happening, they're terrified of God. And it is interesting how they word this: fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. The whole 7 years is a time of God's wrath. It's a mistake. A lot of people think that the second half of the 7 years is the time of God's wrath. The whole 7 years is a time of God's wrath. There's a distinction between the first half and the second half, and there's a number of things that we brought out before, and we'll be talking more about it. The second half, no doubt, is worse than the first, absolutely. And a lot of the judgments in these early ones, it's man against man, right? War, famine, all that kind of stuff. As we get into the trumpet judgments, it's a little bit more directly from the heavens. You get to the bowl judgments, it's clearly all from the heavens. So there's clearly a difference in intensity, and it's much worse second half, but it's all a time of God's wrath. You can't have over 1.5 billion people killed in the early months alone and it not be a time of God's wrath. So the first 6 seal judgments, let's go down a little bit farther here. Let's go to chapter 7, verse 1. After these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth or on the sea or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. He cried in a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth and the sea or the trees till we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads. So you've got, John sees four angels over the earth. The four winds of the earth, the four directions, north, south, east, west. I'm not sure, they're in their coordinates. They surround the earth. They're ready to wreak more havoc on the earth, which are the coming trumpet judgments. But another angel comes out, tells them to hold on, to wait. So it's like they're ready to unleash more wrath, but they're told to wait, don't unleash it yet until we've sealed the servants of God in their foreheads. And let's go down a little bit farther on this, and then we're going to wrap things up. So verse 4, and I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. And so then it goes down through, and each tribe is named, with one exception. That's the tribe of Dan. And there's different ideas, different theories. Why are there not 12,000 from the tribe of Dan? So let me back up just a bit. A lot of you obviously are going to be familiar with this. Some of you, if you're not familiar, it may get confusing as far as the 12 tribes of Israel. There's actually 13 tribes to the children of Israel. Jacob has 12 sons, and each of his sons would be one tribe, with the exception of Joseph. Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. He goes down to Egypt. God gives a great deliverance, miraculous deliverance to Jacob and his whole family, all his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And over 70 of them wind up making a trip down to Egypt to escape the famine in the land of Canaan. Joseph is there. He's been there. God used him. When Jacob blesses his children before he dies, he has Joseph bring his two oldest sons in, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Jacob blesses both of them, and they get numbered, if you will, Ephraim and Manasseh get numbered with Joseph's brothers. That gives us the 13, the extra one. Why do we always hear about the 12 tribes of Israel? Because the tribe of Levi did not get an allotted inheritance in the same way that the other 12 tribes did. When they went into the promised land under Joshua's leadership, they go in, they conquer the land of Canaan, and they begin to divide the land up by lot. And the tribe of Levi was a special tribe. God chose them for himself. The tribe of Levi got cities within the allotments of the other 12 tribes. So you have the 12 tribes of Israel. The tribe of Levi would get cities in the other locations, and then they would get suburbs or land around the cities they could have for their flocks and herds and grow crops. So there's actually 13 tribes in Israel. There's only 12 tribes listed here. Dan is not listed. And we don't know why. There's an interesting, when Jacob, again, just before he dies, he calls all of his sons in and prophesies over them, tells them what's going to happen in the latter days. And he just says, the biblical record is just something short for each one. And there's an interesting reference to Dan, like a serpent that bites the horse's heels and the rider falls backwards. Whether it's treachery on the tribe of Dan's part, there's different theories, different ideas. But anyways, 144,000 are chosen. We know that right after the rapture of the church, millions upon millions of people get saved. we bring some of these verses together and it all fits. That's what it's telling us. A lot of people are going to get saved right after the rapture. Chapter 14, the 144,000 are mentioned in two chapters, chapter 7, chapter 14. In chapter 14, it gives us more information about them. And it uses the term, it says they are the first fruits. Doesn't say of what, but the first fruits. So what we think is happening after the rapture of the church, very soon after that, millions of people are going to realize they've heard the gospel. They're going to realize that what's happened is what the Bible talked about. They're going to turn to Christ. Out of those millions of people, God is going to choose out 12,000 young, unmarried Jewish men, 12,000 from each of the tribes of Israel except Dan, 144,000. And of those 144,000, the angels are going to seal them. I don't know if they're going to have a visible mark. It is kind of interesting. God's marking his servants. We get halfway in the tribulation period. Satan has the image of the beast put up in the holy place. They implement the mark of the beast. Satan's going to have his mark on his servants, if you will. The difference is Satan can't protect his servants, and they're going to be tormented. So 12,000 from each tribe, 144,000. We're going to wrap it up here, and Lord willing, we'll pick it up next week. I want you to, and I know you guys, you can't escape the news, but when you're watching the news, especially be watching for news about the Abraham Accords, always watch what's happening with Russia. We'll talk about the Gog-Magog wars later in this study. Something I find interesting in the book of Ezekiel 38-39, where it talks about that Gog-Magog war. Twice, God says to Gog of the land of Magog, so we believe that that's the land of Russia, to the far north of Israel. Twice, God says, I'm going to put hooks in your jaws and turn you around. It's like Russia's looking one direction, they're focused one direction, but God's going to put hooks in their jaws, turn them around. It's like, okay, you're looking this way, you're focused this way. I'm going to turn you around and I'm going to drag you down into the Middle East, into the land of Israel. That's what God says. When you're watching the news, watch what's happening with Russia, Ukraine. Is there going to be a peace deal there? We know any peace deals are all temporary anyways, and especially in light of Bible prophecy. But keep your eyes and ears open. I think we're living in the last days. I think Jesus Christ is coming again soon. We don't know if it's going to be days, weeks, months, could be a number of years yet. But we are seeing a ton of stuff happening, and it all aligns with what God's word has to say. So thank you for joining us tonight, and Lord willing, we'll see